The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, see everything we do. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. We're here every day at 3 o'clock, and today we have a brand new video, new release from Dan Marshall. It's called Effortless Watercolors. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Dan Marshall, and I know you're used to seeing me outside plein air painting, but in this video we're in my studio here in Denver, Colorado, and I'd like to thank you for joining us. The studio practice to me is just as important as plein air painting. We can really focus in on our tools and techniques without having the pleasure of being bombarded by bugs or people or lawnmowers or cars. And the flip side of that is that that's all the stuff that makes plein air painting so special and so personal. But if we don't go outside with the proper tools and techniques, it just makes it that much more complicated. So in this video, we're going to look at some of my studio practice, and the surprising thing is it's not really any different than my plein air practice as far as my approach. I'll use the same materials, I'll go through the same way of drawing, the same way of establishing tones. It's just I can do it with a little more focus and a little more concentration. I feel like a lot of people, when they get in the studio, tend to sort of lock down, and that's when things get overworked. Their lighting is bad, or they have more time, so you end up just wasting a really good painting by not being able to retain that freshness that you would normally get from a plein air piece. So I'm looking for a balance between the two. Okay, so in this video we're going to be looking at composition, design, pigment management, which is the ratio of water to our pigment. We'll be looking at tones and how to create that beautiful tonal qualities without our watercolors getting too heavy. And we'll be looking a lot at timing, which is how we build our edges in watercolor. So we'll have soft edges, hard edges, and all that. It all just happens through timing. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so before we get started, let's take a look at some of our materials. And these are the same materials that I use when I'm out painting plein air. It's the same palette, it's the same brushes. All this stuff goes into my plein air kit, and it just gets transferred here when I'm in the studio. And basically, it's arranged from warm to cool. It's a very traditional colors in the palette. Let's take a look at some of the brushes I'm using. We'll be using some squirrel brushes for our large washes. As we start to move through the painting, we'll be switching to some of these synthetic brushes. And the main difference with these brushes is not only sort of the points, but the amount of water that they're going to hold. So if I try and do the whole painting with this, it's going to be washed out because it holds too much water. If I do the whole painting with this, I can't do nice big washes. It doesn't have enough water. So it's really important that we are switching our brushes as we progress through the painting. And I may also end up doing some fun stuff with my little I've got this little wacky fan brush. So sometimes I'll use brushes for special effects. And I might use another sort of smaller sable when we get into some of the foliage stuff. But essentially, these are the brushes I'll be using throughout the painting. The paper that I use exclusively is Saunders Waterford 140-pound rough. It is my favorite paper. It has a much more of a soft quality to it than say Arch or some of the other popular brands. It just, the way that it absorbs the washes and the pigments, I don't necessarily have to paint darker than what I want it to. The tones that I put on there, I can be pretty sure they're gonna stay the way they are. And that's because it sort of, the way it sinks into the paper, you don't get a whole lot of runoff. so I'm not getting all these colors running off of my paper. So the tones I put down stay pretty true, and that's probably the main reason why I like it as much as I do. So this is the Saunders Waterford. This is a full sheet. I like having full sheets as opposed to blocks. I just feel like the paper responds better by not being sealed into a block. And I just sort of rip this down to size. And really, there's all kinds of ways you can do this, but I'm usually in such a hurry. I just crease it a few times with my fingers, give it a couple folds, give it a little start of a rip, and then I'll just rip it apart and it's fine. Okay, so for this painting, we will be basically working about a half sheet size, which is essentially 15 by 22. I'll be taping it down just a little bit when I mount this to the board. Okay, so I mentioned I don't like blocks. I like loose sheets, and this paper is sized on both sides. It doesn't really wrinkle that much. You're not going to get a lot of ripples if you're painting properly, but we'll get into that a little bit further later. So what I like to do is just tape this to a board, and I do use a board separate from my table. And the main reason for that is sometimes throughout the painting I'm going to want to control the wash by sort of turning my board. Sometimes I'll work upside down. So I've had a few people ask me, why don't I just tape it to the table? And that's why. It gives me mobility with the board itself. So just a note about tape. I just use a neutral colored regular masking tape. And what I find is if you're taping with blue tape or painter's tape or colored tape, that sort of changes the way that you perceive the values on your paper because you're judging them against this dark border. So I don't use black, I don't use blue, I don't use red. I just want a neutral colored tape, and it's just one more thing that I can control in the watercolor process that helps me see my tones correctly. And we'll just tape the edges of this real quick. Okay, and that's all that I need to do. The paper is now stretched, as people like to say. It's not stretched, it's just taped down. Okay, so that's a look at our materials. Now let's move on to our design process. Okay, so we've looked at our materials, and now we can start to get into our design process. And I will say the one difference about being in the studio than being in plein air is that we do have a little more time to sort of organize our painting and put a little more thought into it. We're not just going outside, oh, that's a nice scene, I'm gonna just copy that. When we're in the studio, it's also not just, I've got this amazing photo, I'm gonna copy it, okay? That has nothing to do with design or art or whatever. Maybe you get one perfect photo out of 1,000, and we wanna move beyond that. We wanna be able to make a painting out of whatever our reference is, because really, our photo reference is reference. It's not law, right? So the same changes that we would make in plein air, I can make in the studio to make a more successful composition in painting. There's basically two tools that I use in the studio when I'm designing a painting. One is thumbnail sketches, and the other are no-tan sketches. And they're both really fun to do. A lot of people ask me if I do these when I'm working plein air, and the truth is I don't. Because when I'm in the studio, I'm building my skills of visually organizing, I'm building my design skills, I'm building my composition skills. So when I'm out in the field, I've got this knowledge that I can just tap into, and I can just make on-the-moment spur decisions. That way, I don't have to worry about the light changing, or when I go out to paint, I'm out to paint. If I go out to sketch, I go out to sketch. So I make a real decision on what I'm doing that day. So when it's time to go out painting, I'm painting, and working in the studio allows me just to do that and be able to execute proper paintings in the field because I've done my time in the studio. Okay, so we'll take a look at how we do these things. And really, the thumbnails I use these little, I don't know, I guess they're little 3x5 cards. And they're just really basic outlines. They're just looking at the shapes and figuring out where things go. So I have a lot of students that, you know, they'll send me thumbnail sketches and or show me some thumbnail sketches, and they're beautiful little drawings, and that's great. You can make beautiful little drawings. The problem is most of the time these beautiful little drawings are horribly composed. And what the thumbnail is supposed to do is to help us organize the painting so we can actually just see the composition and not make this beautifully rendered thing. So if we look at these, they are very basic, just some of them have a little bit of tone in them, but they're just really so I know where my horizon line is, I know where my major shapes are. Okay, so the painting that we're gonna focus on today is this beautiful farm outside of Boulder. I do go out there and paint a lot. I have a few paintings from there, but I haven't painted this particular scene yet. And we've got some problems with the composition. So I'm gonna look at doing a thumbnail and make sure I have my ducks in a row before I get to drawing it on a large piece of paper. Okay, so sometimes I paint in squares, sometimes I paint in a more proportions of whatever the papers I'm working on, whether it's square or like more of a 16 by 20. This happens to be a little more horizontal. Another thing that I'll do is I will put in sort of my third lines, and the rule of thirds helps me to make sure that I am in a balanced, pleasing composition. So I'll always design to the rule of thirds. It's the best way to get to the right placement and proportion in your painting. And I'll sort of put in maybe where that ground area is. There's a vertical in the grain tower, and I want to make sure that that doesn't end up in the middle of the paper. So I'm going to be really cautious of that. And also I'm going to be cautious of how high up it goes. I don't necessarily want it overlapping into that third. And I'll just sort of really look at this whole shape of, I'm going to want this tree to come up a little bit more. This comes down. So really I'm looking at the whole shape of this middle ground and not drawing specifics. I know there'll be another tree over here. I'm going to want that lower than this tree, just so it doesn't have a too even of a feel. This house will come in here. There's another little house that comes back over there. And you know, it's really just, it's not much more than a scribble. And again, it's not a drawing. It's just I need to know where these things sit on the paper. Here's about the base of where that stuff is. And you know, I don't have to get into drawing doors and things. It's really just about for the placement of the thing. And to me, that is a successful thumbnail sketch, right? It's not a it's looking at the major shapes, looking at where they sit on the paper and making sure it feels right. So that is how I do a thumbnail, and it's really not much more than that. It takes seconds, all right? But you've got to think about where you're putting things. And when I go to do the actual painting, I see all the time people will do thumbnail sketches and then they'll show me their painting. It's like they did the thumbnail sketch just to do it, and then they decided, well, I guess I didn't really need to do that. I'm just going to do something different on my painting. And they could have had a great composition, and then when it comes time to the painting, they sort of lose it. So use your thumbnail sketch. This is now a tool. When we get to the actual painting, I'll have my photo reference here, but I'll also have my thumbnail sketch as another sort of point of reference. I've made changes from the photo to the thumbnail sketch, and I'll need those to inform me as we move forward. Okay, so that's a bit about the thumbnail sketch. Let's move on and look at the notan. So as the thumbnail sketch is important to plan your composition, the notan will help you build a stronger design. Basically, it takes it just splits it into black and white. So if it's black and sort of a darker middle tone, that just becomes black. If it's light and sort of a lighter end of the middle tones, that just becomes white. So all we're really looking at is the basic placement of shapes, and these are really fun to do. This is just a little, just a landscape, but I was looking at the main shape of this and how it sort of leads out over this way. A little farm scene. So you could see the sky and the ground basically become negative. It's just we're looking at the negative shapes. These negative white shapes become just as important, if not more so, than the dark shapes. The negative space of the sky, what does that shape look like? The negative space of the ground, what does that look like? So this helps us to identify those. As we're getting into more complex subjects and compositions, it really becomes helpful to just see the shapes and not get lost in all the detail. This is a rail yard taken from, I was going over the bridge, so it's a sort of a down-angled shot, but there's all these tracks, there's all these sort of stacks of cars, there's buildings in the background, and this helps me just organize where are these light shapes, where are these dark shapes. Same thing with the little farm scene here. I can just see where all that light is hitting. Another country scene here. It makes a really neat abstract. But if I had gone to paint this without doing a thumbnail, I might not have thought to put these darks in here. But these really help anchor the composition and draw us into and move our eye through the painting. Also with a slightly more probably a little bit of a different type of composition than I normally do, but I've started to do a couple more of these sort of upper, like sort of no horizon paintings. So just to see the pattern of where this foliage is and the way it frames in the lights, it really helps me clarify what I might want to do with that painting. So we'll take a look at how we do one of these, and we'll use the reference for our painting. And there is a way to cheat with this stuff. There's a lot of cheats that you can use with this stuff. You can use your camera, take a photo and move it around. You'll see the grid lines on there, but that doesn't help you. You're still just composing to that grid. So it doesn't help you necessarily learn that skill. So I always think it's much better to do it analog. Same thing with doing these no-tan sketches. There's different apps out there that you take a photo and you put it in there and it makes a no-tan. That's great, but it doesn't help you to see that. So by doing it manually, you'd start to develop a skill and a way of seeing that you can look at the scene, you can see the connectivity of all the shapes and really understand, wow, this whole thing, it's connected. And that's what the no-tan helps us do. That shows you, it proves to you that everything has to be connected and touching for it to be a pleasing composition. Okay, so we're going to do a no-tan here of our composition. I've done a thumbnail sketch and I have my reference photo here. And now I just want to look at the balance and the play of lights against darks and see if there's something else I can do to enhance the composition. When I do these, okay, so these are a lot of fun to do, and I don't do a pencil drawing. I just come right in with the brush. I come in with this, my favorite brush to do this with is a number 12 Escoda Perla. It's a really sharp synthetic pointed round. And I can draw with this and make the marks that I want to make without, and again, I'm not doing a painting here. I'm just I'm looking at the design. So I'll come into my palette and I'm just using Payne's Gray here, and I'm going to make sort of a inky, just an inky, sort of heavy milkish type mix here. And again, this is not about tone. This is not about anything other than looking at the play of light against dark in our shapes. Aside from being an exercise of looking at our design, this also aids us in the thought process of thinking of making a thought before we put a mark down. I have to really put marks where they need to go. So it's fun. I mean, you could, as you start doing these, you could start with a loose pencil drawing, but I think that kind of misses some of the point because, again, it's not about making a great painting. It's about working out ideas and making sure your design is solid. Okay, so I'll start with, I'll just sort of start and see. Again, I'm just looking at that major shape of the grouping of buildings and where the light is left. And sometimes I'll put in just a little tick of where my horizon is going to be so I don't get lost. But there's some tree stuff here. There's going to be a larger tree that comes up through here. And again, this is not about edges. This isn't about anything other than making a sort of pleasing shape with my lights and darks. This roof cuts back in through there. This is going to come through here. There's a little bit of dark that comes back there. There's a dark window there. And I'll just sort of work my way through. And it just becomes really fun. And I can look at the shape of this V where the two roofs kind of connect. I can look at the angle and height of this roof. And I'm kind of just putting in I'm leaving negatives and putting in the positives. And some lines get lighter, some get darker. There's a door there. Okay, this is framed in with dark. There's going to be some tree stuff up here. Okay, there's some stuff at the base here. There's another roof that cuts this way and comes down and then over. Sort of like a stair-steppy, sort of a little bit of a stair-step scenario here. This will cut through. There's some darks there. This roof comes over and then the stables come out. And the mountain in the background, it just becomes black. We're not doing any atmospheric perspective here or anything. It's just a shape back there. Grab some more of this and I could just fill all of this in. And what this does so much, but really what it's doing, it's helping me see how the light is connected, all right? So it's easy to connect dark shapes, but it's sometimes harder to see how the lights connect. So this really helps me sort of visualize how this light will connect through the painting. Then we've got the front of the stable here. That comes there. There's some stuff over here. And then I'll probably bring a little bit of that lower tree that kind of pops out over there. This might come up just a little bit higher, maybe a little fuller. Something around there. And okay, so that's the basic grouping of shapes. And so I've got this big kind of open area on my foreground. So I'll think about what can I do to help the design of this. And I might put some slight kind of perspective-y lines that just kind of help lead us in there and just sort of give us this little lead in. When I get in here, I may or may not put in some of this fence stuff, but I can put it in here and just see how that's going to go. And then there is, in the reference, there's a little bit of a darker thing here, so I'll dry brush just a little bit of a strip down here that maybe I want that to help balance out. So I'll just indicate that, well, maybe I'm going to want some other dark down there, just to help balance out this shape here. When we look at the notan and we look at our reference image, you could see how I've separated these tones. Even though the sides of these buildings are in shade, I've actually left them white because they lean a little bit more towards the light side. The dark that's on the silo here, I've actually gotten rid of that just to help identify that shape a little bit more in my sketch. So if it leans a little bit towards light, get rid of it. If it leans a little bit towards dark, black it out. And that's sort of the correct way to look at the notan. Okay, so we finished our thumbnail sketch for composition. We finished our notan for design. And now we're gonna move in and do the actual painting, okay? And get into all the fun stuff. All right. In this video, we're gonna be looking at watercolor painting in the studio as opposed to plein air painting. And we're gonna be looking at some specific things, mainly composition, design, and ways to achieve those in a much more thought out way. We'll be looking at mixing colors. We'll be looking at pigment management, which is essentially the ratios of our watercolor pigment to water. And we'll be looking at ways to control edges through timing in our painting. This video is unique. The last two videos we did were plein air videos, and this one is in the studio. So it basically allows us more time to sort of plan and think about our painting and introduce some different tools that will help you grow as a painter. My technique in watercolor painting can really be applied to any subject. The same techniques I use in landscapes or cityscapes I would use in figure painting or portraiture. So really it's a way of manipulating the pigment and understanding how watercolor works, and through my personal process I can apply it across the board. The main thing you'll get out of this video is how just a little bit of preparation can go a long way in creating more elegance, sophistication, and better planned out paintings. My favorite part about watercolor is the immediacy of it, the portability of it. I love that I'm not necessarily in control. When we paint in watercolor, we're more like directors, and we can really just allow the watercolor to paint itself, and that to me is wonderful. We're just sort of directing the pigment, and it's going to do all its own thing.
Well, that is Dan Marshall and Effortless Watercolors. You can learn more about this brand new video at streamline.art. Remember, we have a special discount code for today only, and it's up in the comments section. Go up there right now and grab that. All right, now let's go to the interview with Dan Marshall.
So I've been a professional artist since about 1992, and really the last 10 years have been completely focused on watercolor. So that's really about 30 years of being an artist professionally, but the last 10 years have been a real focus only on watercolor. So my favorite part about watercolor is the immediacy of it, the portability of it. I love that I'm not necessarily in control. When we paint in watercolor, we're more like directors, and we can really just allow the watercolor to paint itself, and that to me is wonderful. We're just sort of directing the pigment, and it's going to do all its own thing. Probably the most difficult thing about painting in watercolor is you have to choose your battles, right? So there may be some things you think that would be great paintings, but that doesn't mean they're going to be great watercolor paintings. There's certain oil paintings that I love, and I love the look of them, but I can't duplicate that in the medium. I guess if there's a difficult thing about watercolor, it's accepting what you can and what you can't achieve. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but you've got to take your losses when they come. But really, it's when I paint, I play to the strengths of the medium. I play to I set myself up for a win as much as I can. That doesn't mean I don't take chances, and it doesn't mean I don't fail. But there is an understanding of there's things with watercolor where you just have to let go and let watercolor be the boss. And there's sort of this idea of choosing your battles. And some things are just not paintable in watercolor. Not for the way that I want to approach watercolor, because I approach it loose and impressionist. I don't want to have to do something I've got to do 30 layers of watercolor on. You can do that, and people do that, but that's not how I want to paint. So I think really it's really with watercolor it's choosing your battles and knowing sort of what you're capable of, or what the medium's capable of. Push it sometimes, but if you try and do that all the time and you're trying to do things that don't work for the medium, then maybe work in another medium. So I find my ideal subject really by just exploring, driving around, walking around. It can be a certain sort of composition that I see, or it could be a quality of light. But really, there's for me, my ideal painting, my ideal subject is really just something that I connect with or speaks to me in some way or another. So it's really not just about painting a photo that someone took. It doesn't matter what the subject is. If I can find some kind of connection to it, that's the ideal subject for me. So landscapes are great as painting subjects because as you're exploring the watercolor medium, there really isn't much to think about as far as drawing and level of difficulty. So when I do landscapes now, I really focus on the design, and I do incorporate structures a lot in my landscapes. I don't do a whole lot of pure landscapes, but as you're starting out with the medium and developing your control, landscapes are great because they're really just organic shapes that you can focus on rather than having to worry too much about your drawing skills. my technique in watercolor painting can really be applied to any subject. The same techniques I use in landscapes or cityscapes I would use in figure painting or portraiture. So really it's a way of manipulating the pigment and understanding how watercolor works. And through my personal process, I can apply it across the board. So if I was to compare studio painting to plein air painting, I can't really say that one has more of a benefit than the other. Plein air painting offers an amazing experience of being surrounded by your subject, being immersed in the subject, and being able to see tone and colors in nature that you never get through a camera. But if I don't do some studio painting, if I don't find that balance, I'll find that my technique will suffer when I'm out in the field. So it's really important for me to maintain a balance of a couple days of studio painting, a couple days of plein air painting. When we're in the studio, we can really have a little bit more time to relax and concentrate on the medium and the techniques that we'll use. So when I go out to paint plein air, I've got everything in my toolkit, whether it's composition or design. I've got all these things I've worked on in the studio and be able to just plug that in when I'm outside. When it comes to composition and painting, I really don't stray too far from sort of tried and true compositions. I'll use those as a starting point, but I'm really not looking to make some kind of like wacky, earth-shattering composition. I stick to what works. I stick to sort of mathematical rules and art truths in composition, and there's a certain aesthetic that I find pleasing, and that's sort of what I shoot for with my composition. They're usually more calm sort of scenes. There aren't a whole lot of I do some action sort of stuff, but for the most part, I want paintings that just feel sort of pleasant and calm. When it comes to drawing for a painting, I really look for just a gestural sort of accurately, it's got to be an accurate drawing, but really when I'm drawing for painting, I'm drawing gesturally. It's completely different than if I'm sketching or if I'm drawing a portrait or rendering something. So the important thing to remember for painting, to me and to you, should be to keep your drawings gestural and loose. If your paintings are too tight, if you feel like you want to loosen up, start with your drawing. Start by just putting in a gestural layout of your drawing without getting too tight. Setting a mood when you're painting is important because we're not just duplicating what we see. We shouldn't be. We should be taking internally and translating it and then putting it out. So even though it may be a bright sunny day, you can still sort of set that mood. Or you could be looking at a bright sunny painting and if you're feeling like you want to do something a little more somber, you can make that into a rainy sort of picture. But really, as artists, we have to know what we want to communicate, and the mood of the reference that we're painting from may not necessarily be the mood that we want to communicate. So by figuring out what your message is, what you want to say with the painting, that should help you set the mood. And that is what will sort of differentiate you from the painter next to you or your best friend who paints. You know, it's your version of whatever you want to communicate, and that's why it's important to kind of decide on what mood you want to express and what you want to tell your viewer. I know it's time to add details in a painting really when I'm getting towards the end of the painting. I'm starting with the largest shapes first, working down to the smallest shapes, and details are the smallest shapes. Details have nothing to do with a good painting. It has to do with when I'm adding detail, I'm going to do that to either draw your attention to the focal point or just put in the bare minimum of detail what I need. So, you know, it's detail is at the very end. I work big brush to small brush. By the time I get down to that little brush, I know it's time for details. So that's when I'll put in telephone poles or birds or cows or, you know, anything. But if the painting isn't already successful, no amount of detail is gonna dig you out of a bad painting hole. The thing that inspires me to keep painting is, well, it's you know, art is a lifestyle. Art has taken over my life completely. I live as an artist. I draw constantly, I paint constantly, and it's not just because I feel like I have to, it's just something inside that continually pushes me. If there's days when I'm not feeling inspired, or if I'm not motivated, I may take a day or two off if I need to reset. But for the most part, I'm a professional, okay? And as a tattooer for almost 30 years, I can't not create just because I'm not in the mood. When you've got someone who's been waiting for an appointment for 6 months or so, I can't just say, I don't feel like doing it today. So I take that same ethic and that same work mode in my painting, and inspiration will find you working. So if I'm not really feeling it, I'll look, if I don't feel like driving around to find a painting spot, I'll look through my photos and I'll find something that I can sort of connect into. I may even just do something really simple just to get the paint moving, and then all of a sudden I'm excited again, I'm into it. But really, with the range of subjects that I approach, if I get burnt out on painting landscapes, I'll move to cityscapes. If I get burnt out on that, I'll move to figures. So it's important to keep, well, for me, I have a broad range of subjects. So if I'm feeling burnt out on something, I'll just move on to something else. But really, it's I just push through it. And I just saw this thing that said, if you can't beat the fear, just do it scared. And I kind of use that approach when I come to painting. If I'm not inspired, I'll just do it uninspired, and I'll make it happen, and I'll push through, and I'll sort of somehow find that inner strength, because I love painting. I want to continue painting, and there's just something inside that, I don't know if you could make that happen, but if you can't make it happen, just fake it till you make it. Okay, so to sort of wrap everything up here, I'd just like to leave you with a few words of encouragement. And the main thing that I would like to say is there's no shortcut in art or in watercolor. It is a lifelong pursuit, all right? So don't take a workshop and think the next week, oh, why aren't I a good painter? Don't think, well, I've painted this before, why can't I paint it now? It's, you have to allow yourself the time to get brush mileage. Don't paint once a month and wonder why you're not getting better. Even if you do just a small sketch or a small painting, you can do a small sketch in 5 minutes in the morning. Start to develop habits that will support what you want to do. I've drawn for a living for a long time, but if I don't keep up with that, I suffer. So I have a habit of doing a little, just even a small sketch in the morning. It just sort of gets my day off to the right start. It keeps my brain and my hand connected. And paint often, draw often. If you're driving your car, do visual painting. When I'm driving past stuff, I'll look at landscapes and I'll think my way through, well, how would I paint that? How would I approach that? So it keeps me in a constant state of creativity in a way. I guess the main thing is allow yourself time to grow, allow yourself to take chances, experiment. Ruin a bunch of watercolor paper. Just have fun. But if you're not having fun, quit. Okay? Like if you don't enjoy it, if you don't enjoy the process, then it's not for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. But ultimately, painting should bring you joy. And to me, painting it brings me a constant joy. I could be having a bad day. I'll sit and do a painting and I'll sink into that world, and just everything else sort of blurs out around me, and that's kind of what keeps me going. So anyway, find the joy in what you're doing. Don't worry about if you're good or not. Don't worry about trying to make a career out of it. Don't worry about entering shows. Like, all this stuff will happen, but you have to allow yourself time to develop before you can, one, have a marketable product, two, kind of play in the game. This is sort of a message to, I don't know if I should say this or not, but this is sort of a message to, wanting to go beyond an amateur. And, you have to allow yourself the time before you start really wanting to put yourself out there. Art is a constant growth. It's a constant development, and my development is nowhere near done. I'm probably not even an eighth of the way there, a hundredth of the way there, to what I want to achieve. So, it's just keep your head up, keep your brushes wet, and enjoy the painting and enjoy the process.
Well, that is Dan Marshall in a brand new video called Effortless Watercolors. You can learn more about that at streamline.art. And remember, there's a discount for today only, and it's up in the comments section. Grab it and check it out. Thank you for watching. I'm Eric Rhodes.
In this video, we're going to be looking at watercolor painting in the studio as opposed to plein air painting. And we're going to be looking at some specific things, mainly composition, design and ways to achieve those in a much more thought out way. We'll be looking at mixing colors. We'll be looking at pigment management, which is essentially the ratios of our watercolor pigment to water. And we'll be looking at ways to control edges through timing in our painting. This video is unique. The last two videos we did were plein air videos, and this one is in the studio. So it basically allows us more time to sort of plan and think about our painting and introduce some different tools that will help you grow as a painter. My technique in watercolor painting can really be applied to any subject. The same techniques I use in landscapes or cityscapes I would use in figure painting or portraiture. So really it's a way of manipulating the pigment and understanding how watercolor works, and through my personal process I can apply it across the board. The main thing you'll get out of this video is how just a little bit of preparation can go a long way in creating more elegance, sophistication, and better planned out paintings. My favorite part about watercolor is the immediacy of it, the portability of it. I love that I'm not necessarily in control. When we paint in watercolor, we're more like directors, and we can really just allow the watercolor to paint itself, and that to me is wonderful. We're just sort of directing the pigment, and it's going to do all its own thing.